Tyler Schwab, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. First things first, we have to say thank you to Steve Murphy over at the Games of Crime podcast for the introduction. Steve has helped me out quite a bit through the years finding quality guests like you, Tyler, to have on my show, and every now and then, we'll swap guests and that kind of thing. So thank you very much, Steve. Mucho apreciado. So, Tyler Schwab, founder of Libertas International, and you founded that like at what, 23? Weren't you? You were young.
Yeah, as a little kid, yeah, 23 years old. Yeah, I started
Wow.
a nonprofit.
That's super impressive to me. But tell us about your life prior to Libertas International. Kind of set the stage.
Yeah, so I grew up in Wyoming, so I'm one of the 500,000 that called, that stay at home. And I just I don't know, like a snot-nosed kid, like growing up, like you share stories about what you used to do in like a small town, like entertain yourself. And we used to like take pallets and stack them on top of like propane tanks and shoot the propane tanks, like make bets with like $2, like whoever can blow up the stack of propane tanks gets, a pot of $12. We used to there's when I grew up, YouTube was just coming out and then eBay was just becoming a thing, and so we decided to order a Sasquatch outfit off of eBay
That's
and then
awesome.
just hike around Yellowstone, just pretending to be Sasquatch in Yellowstone, which just has to be like super illegal, right? But we come out in the book, we come out of the woods, and you get like these cars of people that had traveled, to Wyoming, to Yellowstone to see the animals, the elk, the bears, and you see Sasquatch. And so yeah, I had a good time, some good videos and all that different stuff, and yeah, I played basketball growing up. That was one of my hobbies. Had a great group of friends. And it wasn't until I took like a mission trip to the Dominican Republic because I was a good kid, but I was a pretty selfish kid too. I think a lot of teenagers are, unfortunately.
Well,
And just yeah,
yeah.
you just yeah, you just you my when I traveled, out of Wyoming really for the first time, like I've been like Cancun or Honolulu, but that's not really traveling like to get to know the world.
Right.
When I traveled, yeah, to the Dominican Republic for the first time and saw just poverty and exploitation and abuse, it just kind of changed me, I did my worldview opened up. Like I was shocked about what actual poverty looked like, what actual abuse looked like, the fact that people live in this day in and day out, and it kind of led me to the journey, to now sitting down with you and talking with this podcast and the start of Libertas International. And it all started, with that. And I don't think there's a saying in Wyoming called the world needs more cowboys, and they list like a list of traits of like what makes a cowboy great.
Okay.
And when I remember, I just my parents really instilled that in me when I was a kid, and so when I saw this issue of human trafficking and exploitation of children and child pornography and all these different things, I knew I had to quote cowboy up and do something about it. And 10 years later, 11 years later, this is I'm still here, thankfully.
Wow. Now, what kind of background were your mom and dad? Like, what do they do for a living?
Yeah, my mom's a special ed teacher. She was a special ed teacher in Wyoming. And my dad, he was a school teacher as well for a bit, and then he transitioned into storage and death, actually. My family has owned like this mortuary for a long, long time.
Oh, okay.
Uh, yeah, yeah. So they do like caskets and they do burials, they do funerals and all these different things. And so he's been involved in that. It's been, good for our family, especially like during the recession in the late 2000s. People still have to deal with their dead. And
Yeah,
so
people keep dying. Yeah, that's not
people
going to
keep
stop
dying,
tomorrow.
whether
Yeah.
the economy, yeah, whether the real estate market is up or if it's crashing, like
That's
people still have to
true.
take care of their dead.
Yeah,
And so that's kind of where my background and my parents came from.
yeah. A couple of things that are recession proof. What, mortuaries and liquor stores. Yeah,
Yeah, no kidding. We missed the boat on that one, the liquor store, but the death we
yeah,
we we got involved pretty quick.
yeah. You think about it. When times are good, people are celebrating, they're drinking, and when times are bad, they're drinking even more. So hey.
That's never going away, is
No, never.
it? Oh my gosh.
So January 6, 2011 changed your life forever. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, I just it was the first time I don't know why this moment impacted me so much, but I was I was a missionary down there in Dominican Republic, and I remember we went into this house, and in this house there was this family, and the dad was just drunk off of his ass. He was watching a baseball game. The mom was frantically cooking in the kitchen, and this little girl was in the house, and she was wearing something like a pillow sack for clothing, just really poor, and just you could tell
Yeah.
that she'd had just a really rough life, and she was mopping the floor. And January 6th, holds it's a special day in Latin America. It's the Day of the Kings, Three Kings Day, where traditionally like the kings bring the gifts to Jesus. And
Oh
in
yeah.
Latin America, it's almost like that's the day where Santa Claus or family or whoever brings
Mm.
gifts to the kids. And so the whole place was celebrating except for this one family. And so we were in there and we weren't going to spend much time because obviously we were, preaching the good word, or at least attempting to. And
Yeah.
these people just they just were otherwise occupied with different things. So we were getting ready to leave, and the lunch was done, and so the little girl went to go pick up her dad's lunch, and it was a wet floor. So she walks past the wet floor to deliver her food to her dad and slips and falls because it's a concrete floor.
Yeah.
And food goes everywhere. She bumps her little arm, like she starts to cry. But she didn't cry because she fell. She I think she was crying because she was anticipating what was about to happen. And so dad gets up, he's drunk, he's mad, and he reaches behind his chair and he pulls out this whip.
Oh,
And he grabs her by the head, little 6-year-old kid, and he whips her across the face. Um, and so me and this guy I was with, this other missionary, like we kind of just went into like we have to stop this from happening.
right.
And so we took the whip from him, and he was so drunk, like he had no idea what was going on. We separated, the dad from his daughter, and I think he ended up passing out because he was so drunk. Like he hit her, we separated them, and then he just passed out. He was so wasted. Mom was in like a panic, and the little girl obviously was crying because she had this big gash across her face, and me and my friend who was with me, we were just kind of like, what do we do here? Like, do we like we just kind of at a loss of like what exactly to do, and mom, she pleaded with us. She was like, we haven't eaten since yesterday. This is our only food for the day.
Oh,
For my daughter, like, can you please get her like a glass of chocolate milk or some kind of cookie? I don't know, something to fill her stomach because
yeah.
basically she eats whatever her dad doesn't eat, like leftovers. Like she's like the house pet.
God.
And so we're like, yeah, of course we can do that. And the scene, it had to have been something just so surreal for people watching because it was these two American missionaries walking out of this house with this mother who's obviously distraught and this little girl who's bleeding. And we go to like this little convenience store, and all the other kids in the village are just playing with their toys. They have their Barbie dolls, their basketballs, their soccer
Yeah.
balls. They're just enjoying Christmas essentially, except for this one kid. And we went to the store and we went in and we placed an order where, hey, can we get like a chocolate milk and some cookies or something for the girl? And she's there, she's trying to like just stop the bleeding on her face. And this woman behind the counter, she just was very observant of the situation. And I think
Yeah.
she knew what had happened because she was a neighbor girl. She probably knew what was going on in that house. And she just looked at the situation and just the Christmas being, it being Christmas and this little girl not having anything to play with. She gave us the order of like chocolate milk and some cookies. And then she also gave us like this knockoff Barbie doll for free. She was like, "Here,
Okay.
honey, like here's
Oh,
a gift for you. Like, Merry
yeah.
Christmas to you." And that little girl, like, just her world changed just for a second. Like
Yeah.
she was no longer concerned about the bleeding gash on her forehead. She was now focused on this gift that someone had given her. She was now, just for a second in time, she was now like just a normal little girl. And she was so happy. She took the Barbie doll. She didn't say goodbye to me. She didn't say goodbye to her mom. She left her chocolate milk and her cookie like on the counter. She went out in the street, opened it up, threw it in the ground, and then started to play with the other kids. For a second in time, she was a normal kid. Like this gift that this person gave to her, it didn't change her life. Like it didn't rescue her from the situation. It didn't cure the wound on her forehead. It didn't fix all of her underlying problems. But for today and just today, she has to be a normal kid with a normal gift on Christmas Day. And I was so impacted by that moment because I don't think I've ever seen something so kind from a stranger
Yeah.
to give like this gift that probably cost $3 or $4 to this little girl, and to just see her world just completely change just for a day. And it just like I felt like my being like start to change, where me being at this time like a 20-year-old kid, just kind of my perspective shifting because being a teenager, being an early 20-year-old kid, you just assume the world revolves around you, that you are the most
Yeah,
important person in the
that
world,
is
that
true.
you are the center of the world, like that your needs matter more than anybody else's needs. And that moment it started to shift in that we're like this, like we're all connected. We all have the power to impact each other's lives. I want to do something. I didn't know exactly what I could do at the moment, but I knew from the example of this woman, I want to do something to impact the lives of the most vulnerable children in the world. I don't know what that is yet, but I want to make an impact in the lives of people like that woman had made on that little girl that day.
Wow. Now, to kind of set the stage, you said you were a missionary. Who are you affiliated with, and what did that look like?
Yeah, so I was affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they have a missionary program. It's almost like military service, like
Okay.
for members of the church. Like it's not required, but it's strongly encouraged. It's like it's required without being required, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it's very culturally mandated, I guess is a good word, which is fine. And so a lot of my cousins, my friends went on missions. Like you submit like your application to be a missionary, and they just send you just to a random spot. Like you could end up in. I had people that went to like Perth, Australia. My cousin went to Caracas, Venezuela. My cousin went to Maine, Baltimore area, out there. He moved around from different states out on the East Coast. Um, my other cousin like went to Colorado. Like you just have no idea
Okay.
like where you're gonna get sent. And so when I got my assignment to the Dominican Republic, I thought that place was in Africa. I had no idea where the Dominican Republic was.
Right.
Well, like little did I know it's like just 100 miles off the coast of Florida, but Spanish speaking. And so yeah, it's 2 years. It's 2 years. They could just kind of like throw you in the river and expect you to learn how to swim. Like for me, as like a 19-year-old selfish kid, it really helped me grow up really fast. And then it gave me, I think, the one superpower that I actually have. It's the ability to speak Spanish fairly fluently, which is just a skill that comes in handy every single day. But that's kind
Where,
of how it works. Is
where did you learn Spanish? Did you grow up like in a bilingual house or in school or what?
no, I spoke no Spanish. My dad spoke Spanish because he served his mission in the Mormon church in Guatemala.
Okay.
But we never spoke Spanish in the house because my mom doesn't speak Spanish.
Okay.
I learned just by being thrown into the Dominican Republic, and the church was just kind of like it's very much like throw the baby into the pool and hope it learns how to swim kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
Because they
Total
throw you in the middle
immersion.
of nowhere. Oh,
Yeah,
total
that's
immersion.
yeah, what
It's
they
all it
say
was
that's the best way to learn. I took like I think it was either 2 or 3 years of high school Spanish, and I barely remember any of it. It was like verbs and pronouns, proper grammar and syntax and all this other stuff. And I just wanted to learn the conversation. I wanted to be able to speak Spanish with somebody, and I really didn't learn that. After like 2 or 3 years, I'm like, that would have been helpful. Later on in my life, I'm a cop and I'm in a predominantly Spanish speaking part of the city, and I'm just lost.
yeah.
Thank God there were other cops around that were fluent, that I could just get on the horn and say, "Hey, could I have a Spanish translator here, please? Please." I'm as gringo as they get, and I'm just
Nice.
so I can imagine what it would be like 24/7. I could go home and not have to worry about it, but you didn't have a choice.
No, I didn't have a choice. They throw you in there and you just kind of. I got told a phrase by like some older missionaries than me that knew Spanish, and they were like, "If you don't learn, you don't eat." And that's a pretty good motivation to
Oh
learn
yeah.
Spanish. It's like, oh, okay, got it. So
All
it's that kind
right.
of thing. And
C.
yeah, si, senor.
Yeah.
You just kind of have to, like, if you want to communicate, if you want to express your feelings, if you want to be heard, if you want to, people to hear what you have to say, you have to learn. It took 6 months of just me struggling before I finally started to understand, be able to communicate. And about a year in, I started dreaming in Spanish, and I was like, that's when I knew I
I
knew
was just gonna
Spanish.
ask you that.
Yeah.
People who are bilingual, I try to ask that question, like, do you dream in like your first language or the second language? It's like I'm always curious about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had it both ways, but when I was in the Dominican Republic and I finally felt like I could learn something and I knew something, I started to dream in Spanish,
Wow.
which that's kind of fun. You're just like, okay, I'm no longer, obviously I'll never be on the same level as like a natural Spanish speaker,
Right.
but at least understanding the basic and knowing that they can't, take advantage of you or anything.
Interesting. So, I'm guessing this was like door to door. You're just like cold going to people's houses, knocking on their door, and you're just gonna kind of preach to them. And did they partner you up with somebody that spoke Spanish then? Because otherwise, you're just gonna be staring at each other.
Sometimes they do. Sometimes they
Okay.
partner you up with someone that speaks Spanish, but sometimes they don't too. And those were some hard months. But
You a lot of
good
pointing and
growth
smiling.
months. Yeah. I'm lucky enough to where like some of my friends that got sent to like Greece or even like New York City or something where maybe people are like less friendly toward random strangers knocking on your door.
Yeah, that.
Like my cousin, he was in somewhere in the East Coast. I don't remember which state exactly, but I think it was New England. And he would get like five or six doors slammed in his face every single day. And in my missionary service, I only got two doors slammed in my face the entire 2 years. And I locked on
Oh
probably
wow.
30 doors every single year. Just Dominicans are very kind, they're very God-fearing. And so even if they don't share your beliefs, they still want to hear a message of Jesus Christ and of God. And so we just would sit down and shoot the breeze and talk
Yeah,
about this kind of stuff. And then
interesting.
you really get to know people that way, like what their fears are, what their hopes are, what their dreams are, what they
Now,
hope happens after this life. And
now going
it's a
back
beautiful thing.
to what you observed with this poor little girl, is there any police around? I mean, like that clerk, if this was America, it's like I think if strangers saw this happen, usually they're going to call the cops, most likely, not always. And then if there's a neighbor or I mean being a cop for 25 years, that's how we would get the calls. Sometimes it would be just like the cable guy or whatever and it's
Yeah.
like, man, they're really abusing this kid. I couldn't sleep last night. That kind of thing. Is there anything like that in the Dominican Republic?
Yeah, there is, but a lot of families don't involve the police in any way because it creates negative repercussions like in the community as well, especially when it comes like trafficking cases. Like in this
Yeah.
situation, yeah, the cops should have been called, but the mom, we tried to convince her of that, like, hey, you should call the cop, and she was like, well, then how am I going to eat at one meal a
Yeah.
day? Like, I get one meal a day, and he's the provider. What am I going to do if he goes to jail? I can't survive without feed my daughter without him there, despite him, physically abusing me. Um, so they didn't that in that situation, they probably should have called the cops, but they didn't. In some of the cases that we work later on, with like anti-human trafficking
Yeah.
cases, there are some cases where like we have corrupt police officers that are paid off that are part of the trafficking
Mm.
ring in general. And then there's some places it's just really it's really hard. There's just some laws that are really tough to get around. Like for example, in Colombia, if I were to report someone who's trafficking me, the second I make that report, that trafficker knows my name, knows my address, knows my phone number, everything, because I have to put that on the document of my
Yeah.
reporting.
Right.
And then he gets an email that he's been reported, and he gets the name of the person that reported him. And so what does he do? He takes repercussions against that person.
Yeah, that's dangerous as all heck. Yeah.
Yeah, it just
So,
really makes you appreciate like our system too, to where in the system that we work in, like in some of these developing countries, we really have to be creative to keep our people safe.
sure.
Um, which makes just really grateful for like our system here, where there's two things. Like one is like you can't accuse an innocent person without some consequences. Like it protects the person being accused, but also when it's verified that that person is who that person who reported them says they are, like there's ways to keep that person safe and anonymous, especially if they're a minor until trial, which is
Okay.
really, really beneficial for our
Yes.
system here.
You know, I was 30 years old when I got on the job, and I thought I was fairly worldly. I grew up in Chicago as a kid. I saw my first dead body when I was like, I don't know, 10 or 11 years old. Somebody got murdered out in front of my grandma and grandpa's house. It was with a shotgun too.
Jeez.
It was nasty.
Ugh.
I was home alone. I was at their house, by myself. I heard the boom, then you hear all the sirens and everything else. So I thought yeah, I've seen a few things, but I didn't know anything. Until I got on the job. I'm in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city, if not the country, and seeing how people actually lived. I mean, sleeping on the floor because they're afraid of getting shot, for a drive-by, cockroaches everywhere, rats, just the way the way people actually lived was just it was such an eye opener, and it made me so thankful for what I had. I had
Yeah.
it was like a 950,000 square foot ranch house. It was 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and I thought it was the Taj Mahal after going into these homes. It was clean. There was food in the
Yeah.
refrigerator. I mean, just basic stuff that other people don't have. And boy, I wish there was a way that people could experience that and then get a different appreciation for what they do have.
Yeah.
I really do. But yeah, that
Yeah,
was
for
my
sure.
eye opener is when I started going into these neighborhoods and yeah, yeah, just the way other people live in these totally impoverished neighborhoods and just totally crime ridden and they need so much help. It's not to go off on a tangent, but the whole defund the police, I just get such a kick out of that because every neighborhood meeting that I would go to, later on I got promoted to sergeant, and part of your duties was going to neighborhood like crime meetings. And not once did I ever hear somebody that lived in the worst of the worst neighborhoods saying, I want less cops. They wanted their own squad car parked in their front lawn. I mean, they're literally war zones. They wanted a small
Yeah.
army of cops in their neighborhood. Those were the good people that lived there. Yeah, criminals didn't want us. Yeah, they didn't want to see
Yeah.
us. But anyways, that's another talk for another day. Let's start talking human trafficking. You hear it, but it's kind of in the shadows of mainstream media. What exactly is human trafficking? And why do you think it's in the shadows? It's really not in pop culture, to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I can tell you just what it is and what I think of
Yeah,
it. I do want to comment one thing on your law enforcement thing is that the people that I talk to in the developing world, they talk about the thing that most often keeps them poor is not having access to law enforcement. It's law enforcement that actually protects your property, protects your safety,
yeah.
it protects your business. Like the more law enforcement you have, the less poor you are actually. Like there's a
Hmm.
really good book that like people can read. It's called The Locust Effect, and it talks about how in the poorest of the poor the around the world, it's not having access to law enforcement that actually enables poverty more than any other thing on the planet. So yes, don't defund the police, give the police more funding because the more police you have statistically, the less poor people are.
Okay.
um yeah, yeah, really good book, The Locust Effect by Gary
Okay.
Haugen, really good book.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so human trafficking, I don't think it's in the media a lot because it's something that's not fun to talk about, I think. Like it's almost like, I even share like with some of my family members about like some of the cases that I work on and they don't want to hear it. Like it's too dark, it's
Yeah.
too horrific, it's too like you talk about just like being exposed to just the worst of the worst. Like you talk about like the house of people that like the rats and the maggots and all these different things. I remember the first human trafficking case I ever worked on in the Dominican Republic is the police got an anonymous tip of this webcam streaming thing on Facebook where this mother is streaming her two daughters to a group of pedophiles in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
My
And the
God.
two kids in the videos were 7 years old and 5 years old.
Oh,
And
God.
the pedophiles would send the mother cryptocurrency based on every sexual act that the 7-year-old would perform on her little sister.
And her mother is doing this. Their
Yeah,
mother.
her mother's the one making the little girl abuse her own
Oh,
sister.
God.
So, we worked with the cops to find out, where exactly that was coming from, plan like a plan of action for like taking care of these two kids. And I was lucky enough to be invited on this operation in the Dominican Republic to just provide aftercare for the kids, make sure that they're safe, and make sure that there's some kind of connection to where they can go into a good place to live. Because there's three kids in that house. There was the 7-year-old girl, the 5-year-old girl, and then their 1-year-old little brother.
Yeah.
And when we went into that house, like we found it's just a house of horrors. Just smelled like garbage. There's rats everywhere. There's just everything is falling apart. And then you go into the bedroom and there's this bed that has all sorts of just, sexual paraphernalia on it. It's got blood on it, and there's a camera
Oh,
right next to the bed. And like I'll never forget that scene for one, just like the hellacious scene that it was something just out of hell. The whole scene was like a scene out of hell. The kids were scared, they didn't know what was going on. The mother was obviously trying to justify her actions. And that scene as a whole, from start when we first got the case to the finish, is a very nasty, nasty case. And when people talk about it, like it makes people uncomfortable. Like I can't believe that actually happens to little kids. I can't believe that it's actually family members of some of these kids that are facilitating this abuse. And I can't believe like this group of like pedophiles in Pittsburgh were just like a bunch of blue collared construction workers that all found each other
Ugh,
online and would join up once a week to participate in this. And it's kind of scary to think that those people live in our communities. And so that's why I think like it's not talked about as often as it is because it's it's extremely unpleasant and horrific to talk about.
man, well, what is like the definition of human trafficking? Because you hear like a long time ago, you hear like white slavery. You would
Yeah.
hear like different terms. I think it's the same, but kind of educate us exactly what it is.
Yeah, so human trafficking is modern day slavery. It's and the definition of it of how you know someone is being trafficked and exploited is the three words force, fraud, and coercion. Is someone forced into like or if they're under 18. If they're under 18 and they're being sexually exploited, they're automatically a victim of human trafficking. There's no need to prove force, fraud, or coercion. You like force, like someone like a lot of the cases that we hear where like in Venezuela, for example, there's some women in Venezuela that are forced into prostitution in Venezuela and then brought up here to the United States under force. Like they're not allowed to leave. They're forced to pay off some kind of debt. They're kept in a dance club where they can't escape. That meets the definition of force. There's the fraud where, for example, let's say I'll just use the United States as like an example of some of the cases I've worked on here
Hmm.
where a girl in Guatemala believes she's coming to the United States to work um, in construction or picking fruit in California, something like that. Comes up here, her documents are taken. It's like, well, actually, we want you to be a stripper in our dance club, and if you don't, we'll tell ICE and they'll deport you back to your family, and and you won't be able to provide for your family. That's fraud. Coming up here, coming anywhere with the assumption that you're going to do something, and they end up sexually exploiting you instead. And then coercion, which is very similar to fraud of tricking someone to do something against their will. We get a lot of these like via webcam studios, and coercion usually involves the presence of a third party actor, a pimp, essentially,
Yeah.
someone that's facilitating the abuse of this person and then taking a pimp or a coyote or whatever you want to call it, that's taking money based on the abuse of this person. And like it essentially it's modern day slavery. It's what slavery looks like here in 2025. When I grew up, I assumed that like Abraham Lincoln ended slavery,
Right.
and I was wrong. I was wrong. Like slavery, I think is based on the numbers that you would get every year from like the United Nations and all these different groups that study slavery, is that slavery has never been more prevalent. I mean, there's anywhere between 25 to 40 million modern day slaves to living today in 2025, with about 10 million of those being children, and 2 million of those children, 2 million out of the 10 children are being sold for sex.
You know, yeah, it's just so I'm searching for the word, it's just so mind-blowing that slavery, there's nothing new about slavery. This has been going on since the dawn of man. It's like, my name's Patrick. Saint Patrick was a Roman slave that escaped.
Yeah.
It's if you want to look at slavery, you just have to go back in history. It comes in all different shapes, sizes, colors, whatever. Nobody's got the corner on that market, but like you said, it's 2025. We think that we're so evolved, we're so modern, we're so, all of that, but this is still going on, and with these kinds of numbers, and it's hard to believe. I'm sure there's some people that you run into that are like, you're full of it. This really isn't happening. I mean, what do you say to
Oh
those
yeah.
people?
Yeah. Oh, the best way I think to get people to get on board with like that actually exists is to hear from a survivor.
Yeah.
Hear from someone who actually survived it and hear about their experience. So we always try like when different media outlets like want to talk to us about like modern day slavery, where it's like, well, we can tell you, or we can introduce you to someone that's received support from us and they can tell you about their experience themselves. Because they're the ones that can share what actually happened, what actually is occurring and how it actually works. And then, there's some circumstances where we have to be the voice of some of these survivors because they can't speak for themselves. Like I know that your podcast, being former law enforcement yourself, like one of the this is a case I talked with Steve about, and Steve got really emotional with it because it's a horrific case because it's a terrible story, but it's also hits close to home because it was facilitated by an NYPD police officer,
So,
where this police officer from New York City was abusing a 19-month-old baby from
oh my
Venezuela.
God.
And yeah, he was he was filming it. He was asking for videos when he was not in South America. He was asking for the mother to facilitate videos for him. And one, she actually the mother's in jail too. Thank God. She was a pimp, but she actually had to put some limits on this police officer where he was like, "No, I want you to have her do things to a dog," and she
Oh,
was like, I'm not going to do that. Like it's my limit is I'll do things to her myself, and you
oh,
can do things to her, but I won't have her do things with an animal. And I'm just like, these two people are monsters. Like these two
yeah,
people
they
are
are.
just sick monsters. And for her, like she can't speak, like she's a modern day slave. Like she's being forced to do things so her mother can make money, and so this police officer can make money when he sells those videos on whatever outlet he was using to sell those videos. And she's one of the 2 million. She's one of the 2 million, but in her case, she can't speak for herself. And so we were the ones that spoke up for her. And she's still with us. She's still in our program. In fact, she just turned 3 years old last week, and so we gave her a pretty sweet birthday party.
I mean, I just think to myself, it's like, how come Whoopi Goldberg isn't screaming at the top of her lungs on The View about this? Why aren't you or others like you that are like championing for these victims in mainstream media? I mean, I know nobody wants to talk about it. It's a very dark subject, obviously, but I guess, there's two ways of attacking this. One would be, going after the people who are exploiting these poor children, and two is to go after the people who are actually consuming this, that are paying for it, and that's causing this to happen. So it's, I can see you going after it two ways with human trafficking. My first exposure was, I'm a cop. We had I was a sergeant actually, and I got a phone call from our sensitive crimes division that deals with human trafficking, abuse of children, elders, et cetera, and say, hey, we're a part of this human trafficking task force. They had one or two FBI agents with them, and they're like, we're going after this. We have a search warrant. We're gonna, like break down this door in this hotel. And I'm like, okay. And I mean, I knew what it was, and I dealt a lot with street level prostitution as a cop and as a sergeant. And we would have stings, et cetera.
Yeah.
And most of the girls that were doing that were of age, and most were just drug addicts. That was the common where I worked. That's the reason why they were selling their bodies.
Yeah.
So that's what I was used to. So that's what I kind of thought this was going to be like. And we boot the door, we go in, and unfortunately, the guys that we're looking for aren't there. But there's credit cards all over the place. There's laptop computers. There's all kinds of evidence there. But then I look, and on the headboard, there's duct tape. And down, and I'm like, please tell me this isn't what I think it is. And they're like, oh, yeah. So this FBI agent, one of our sensitive crimes detectives, like, they look for runaways that come up from Chicago, like at the Greyhound station or wherever. They're hungry. They don't have anything to eat, for whatever their family situation is. They're not wanted, or they don't want to go back to their family, and they have to do something for money. So it's like, hey, you know what? There's this pimp. I'll take care of you. I'll give you food and shelter. And at first, that's what it is. I'm your best friend. Then it turns into, hey, you're going to have to earn. And it's like, okay. But they would literally shoot these girls up with heroin and turn them into zombies. And Craigslist had a part, it was called, I forget, uh, whatever part of Craigslist had a thing for if you wanted to order up a girl. It was called Backpage. That's what it was, Backpage.
Yeah.
And I'm just learning about this. I'm naive, and I've been on the street for how long? And they said, yeah, they drug up these girls, and somebody will go up on this back page, and it's like, yeah, they'll go into this hotel room and have sex, usually with an underage girl that's duct taped to the bed. And these are like, quote unquote normal dudes that are doing this. How in God's name could you even think this is okay? I mean, I understand prostitution. It's the oldest profession in the world, right? It's been going on forever. But this just
Yeah.
is such a different level of ugliness and sickness and just evilness. And it's like, I, I was just awestruck. And that was my first time, then I had other, dealings with them, helping them out. I'm like, yeah, call me anytime. This is fun. I'd love to arrest somebody for this. This would be great. But it was just so, I went home that night and I was just like, oh my God, there's actually people out there like this. And I mean, I've been around, I don't know how many homicides, child abuses, you name it, sexual assaults, yada, yada. And this was just like, how could, like, again, a quote unquote normal person pay for this when they know she's completely, like, it's a zombie, for God's sakes?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tactic that pimps use. Like there's like uh they do use like the duct tape, they'll use violence, they use stuff like that when girls are non-compliant. But a lot of the pimps that you mentioned, they shoot them up with like heroin or cocaine or things like that because once you have a victim that's a runaway, and let's say you shoot her up with heroin, there's no need to chain her up because she's addicted and you're her dealer. So she's always going to come back. She can run away, she can go wherever, but when that addiction starts to kick in, she's always going to come back. And these traffickers, like they're evil, they're sadistic, but they're smart. Like they are smart on how to keep their victims under their control, and using drugs is an easy way to do it. And that's why you said like I think the best way to end this is the demand part of it because
Yes.
I think basic economics, like, this is what I learned in my first business class, which I got like a D minus in. But it's supply and demand, like
Sure.
with when there's no that's why there's no more video stores because there's no more demand to go get a video, rewind it, and deliver it back and pay the lay fee. It just went away.
Sure.
And now, like with human trafficking, like it's bad, it's getting worse, it's doing all these different things because the demand hasn't gone away. And as long as there's demand of people, they're looking to buy sex, to buy violent sex, and to buy violent sex with children. There will be someone somewhere that finds vulnerable youth and provides that to this demand.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the numbers on your website, and it's like 40 million people trapped in human trafficking in the world. And I was just thinking to myself, how could this be? It generates over $150 billion a year. Where does that number come from? I mean, I just can't wrap my head around that.
Yeah, those numbers are they're put out by the United Nations, and there they have their funding to like go do all these studies and all that stuff. Like I
Yeah,
don't know where that money comes from either, but I know it's is a lot of money and it's a lot of people looking to pay for this. And I didn't really realize because like I had worked, my career is a lot of time spent with the victims and them disclosing their abuse, and then us supporting them as they go through like the legal process. But I first got an idea of where these numbers could be legit. The first time I went out on like a demand sting with law enforcement, they invited me out. There's a case out in Florida where they were doing like a sting operation, like at a sting house or something. Went out to Florida, and those agents, I think for the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, they put out, some fake accounts on Grindr, on Tinder, on Backpage, like whatever sites they were using, and just constant. They were constantly getting hit up by people that thought they were talking with a 12-year-old girl who was being sold. And just, these people were like, we were there for 12 hours, I think. And these agents, I think there were 7 or 8 agents that were all maintaining at least 15 conversations per agent, I think. And I'm just like, I can't believe this. Like, we're in this, and, this wasn't a big city in Florida. It seemed like, well,
yeah.
to me, it seemed like a little town, and just 15 different people her agent all engaged like at the same time looking to abuse this kid. And it happens, I think, everywhere. Like even in like Wyoming, there was this FBI guy that came and gave a presentation at my high school. My high school is very small. It was like 700, 800 kids.
Yeah.
In Wyoming, there's only 500,000 people in the whole state. And before the presentation, he put out like a fake ad, to give an example of like how many people actually want to engage in this. And by the end of his hour-long presentation, he had something like 42 or 43 unread messages from people just in our community that were looking to engage sexually with this little kid, this little fake account that he had created. That's where I think the money comes from, is that the money is there because there's so many people looking to like participate in this, unfortunately. Like, you get people that are looking to spend, like you get some, I've heard some cases where like they will like auction off virginities in Europe for like $5,000, $6,000 per rape. There's cases in Cambodia where they'll sell a girl as a virgin and then sew her back up and then resell her as a
Oh,
virgin. Yeah. And then you get cases like in Latin America where they're just selling their daughters for a dollar fifty per rape, and she's getting abused 14 times a day. I think that's where the money comes from, is it happens every day, every night. There's no rest, and traffickers are unfortunately really sadistic and sick in the way they make their money.
Man, so the USA leads the world in human trafficking consumption. What does that mean, and why the United States?
Man, that's a good question. I've asked myself that question a lot because I love my country. Like I
Yeah, so
love
do I.
being part of the United States. I think it's a great, I think it's, once you've traveled the world, and the world
Oh
is a
yeah,
beautiful place. But when you come back home, there's just stuff here,
yeah.
it's just stuff here. But I think for one is leading the world in human trafficking. That means a lot of people are brought into the States to be sexually exploited. And also there's a lot of Americans going out into the world because a lot of places, like to get in the United States, it is hard. Like you do have to have a visa, you have to go wait at the embassy for a long time. There's a process you have to do if you're not crossing illegally to actually get here legally. Versus like for us as Americans, like going out to the world, if we want to do that, we wait 6 weeks for a passport and then we just go. We drop the plane ticket, we purchase a plane ticket, and then we're out and about. And so every single day, there's Americans that are traveling to places like Mexico, to Jamaica, to Greece, to Thailand, like wherever, and finding the most vulnerable in those countries, and they're abusing those kids. So it's Americans are leading that and just traveling because they have access to the money, to the passports, all these different things to abuse these kids in other countries. But also the thing that really I think puts a black eye on the United States is that we are the largest consumers of child pornography across the world. For whatever reason, like our consumer culture, our tendency to be addicted to different things.
Mm,
Like the reason that like there's so much violence in Latin America over the drugs and the cocaine and the production, all this different stuff, is because there's a demand for drugs in the States that no one can meet yet because there's
right.
just so much demand for this illicit drug. It's the same thing with child pornography. There's so many people that are consuming child sexual abuse material that the rest of the world just can't keep up. And it's mainly us. It's the Americans that are ones that are sharing that, they're viewing that, they're storing that, and that are producing that as well.
And I guess
Like I'll talk like
we're also one of the richest countries in the world too, so we have the
yeah.
money.
So we have that money to spend. And so people
Yeah.
know that, like, for example, like it's a good point you brought up to where a lot of the places that we work in Latin America, if let's say a Mexican trafficker is selling a 12-year-old girl to a Mexican client, he may charge that client, that rapist, essentially, that charge that rapist $10 at most, versus like when American comes down, he may charge that American 50 or $60, 50 or $60 per rape.
Ugh.
And so for American, like they think they're getting a discount. Like this guy gets to rape a 12-year-old kid for only $50. And that's what's happening. And it's not just happening in Latin America, it's happening across the world. It's also happening in our own communities. One of the most brave girls that I ever met actually is one that lives in Salt Lake City, a survivor that was trafficked by her own family, two members in her community in Salt Lake City, where she was abused physically. And they took the abuse that they filmed and sold it to other people across the United States.
Ugh. God, that's so horrible. You know, obviously there's been lots of talk about the border and Mexican drug cartels. We're talking. Going back to Steve Murphy. Medellin. Down in Colombia. All that kind of stuff. And from what I've seen and heard, it's like okay. Obviously, they're not going to stop trafficking drugs, but they're also doing the human trafficking too, because they're business people. They say, "Oh, look, with no soul." I'll preface
Yeah.
that they're business people with no soul whatsoever,
Yeah.
but it's like, hey, we can make money doing this too, so why not? How much of that is going on?
Oh, it's crazy. Like it's happening. It's happening on every port of entry all across that border. Um, there's Latin America's it's just going through a rough time right now. There's a lot of bad leaders down there, places like Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. And because of that, there's people that get desperate. They look for the better life. And like you said, like there's these people that take advantage of that. Specifically, like you said, like the drug cartels that are businessmen. They're always looking to diversify their business. Like Like you named it so well where they are business people with no soul.
Right.
Because how they diversify, they do the weapons, they do the drugs, they do all these different things, and they do people. Because you can sell people over and over and over again. You have soldiers essentially that want to pay to abuse women as well, abuse vulnerable women. And then you get people in the United States who are looking to bring women to the States to be exploited as well. There's a really sad trend, I think, in the world where and it's been happening forever and I think it just gets worse and worse and worse as we go on like through the existence of our planet is that um, women have been sexualized so much. They get younger and younger. They start to sexualize young girls. And right now, we're living in a moment where a Latin female is extremely sexualized. And so there's a demand to essentially abuse a Latin American child. And drug cartels, people at the border, like they know that. And so they're trafficking those girls to the United States for that purpose. And a lot of these
Mm.
kids, like they're looking to join up with their parents who are already here, looking for a better life, and
Yeah.
they just trust the wrong people. And these people, they look to turn a profit on the desperation of these boys and girls. So I think shoring up our border, I think making sure that our board like there's proper vetting on who actually comes to that border.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I love about the United States is that it is a place where, for the most part, like you can feel safe, you can work hard and get ahead. That like our government, like obviously there's some corruption, but the police officers, for the most part, you can trust, you can rely on them to
Sure.
keep you safe. It's like the American dream as far as like safety is real, and I do think that some people, should experience that, but you have to vet these people to know why they're coming across and who they're actually who's going to be their support system. Because a lot of the places, there's a lot of people looking to exploit the vulnerability and the desperation of a lot of vulnerable women and a lot of vulnerable girls.
So, how did you educate yourself, regarding human trafficking, and why start your nonprofit, Libertas International?
Oh, I just when I served my mission, I got done with my mission. I went to college. Just doing the thing, like just going to
Yeah.
college, going on dates, taking a bunch of debt. The things that
Yeah,
kids in
that's
their early
college
20s
stuff. Yeah.
do. Yeah, just college stuff. Looking for like good deals, like on tacos and pizza and shit. And but I remember I sat in this like lecture once. This guy was talking about modern slavery, and this the title of the presentation, like the reality of modern day slavery, is obviously really interesting to me. I was like, "What are you talking about, modern day slavery?" And he mentioned just five countries off the top of his head that where there was modern day slaves. There's Haiti, there's Thailand, there's Uganda, there's Russia, and there's Dominican Republic. And he mentioned, if he would not have mentioned Dominican Republic, I don't think I would have cared.
Yeah.
Not cared, but like it just wouldn't have,
It wouldn't have
got
popped
me in
that.
as
Right. Yeah. You were there
yeah.
for two
So I
years. Yeah.
spent yeah. And so I love those people, and I love people from Russia as well. But I didn't live there for 2 years, and so the emotional draw wouldn't have got me. But he mentioned it, and so I was like, oh my gosh, like I gotta find out more. I gotta find out more. I just want to find out how I can help. I didn't know how I could help or anything, but so everything I owned that had any kind of value, my Xbox 360, my mattress, my textbooks, I sold it all to buy a plane ticket to the Dominican Republic on some nasty airline that was super cheap, but it got me there
Yeah.
just so I could find a victim and talk to her, find out what the heck was going on.
So you're not being
And
sponsored or anything. This is just you.
no, this is just me. This is just me. And like,
Oh.
I'm not doing research for a paper. I'm not doing research for a
Yeah.
class. I just want to know. I just want to open up, myself to like, okay, you're talking about this problem and I care, but I want to meet someone that's actually survived it or going through it or whatever. And so I went into a dance club. I went into a dance club, not undercover or anything. I just went in there, waltzed in as Tyler, and I said to the guy, the pimp in there, and I was like, "Oh, that girl looks 14. Like, how much per hour?" And he was like, $30. He's like, "What do you want to do with her? Like, what do you want to like? What kind of stuff are you good with doing?" I was like, "Oh, I don't want to do anything. I just want to go buy her some nachos and talk to her." And the pimp was like, "What? Like, get the
I,
hell out of here, bro! Like,
yeah,
what are you like? Are you a
exactly.
cop
You're
or
in
something?"
trouble.
He's like,
Yep.
"Yeah." He's like, "Get the heck out of my club." And I was like, "Well, okay, what if I give you $40 and you watch us from the corner? Can I just talk to her? I'll give you $40." And he was like, "Oh, yeah, sure, whatever." Took my money and let me do whatever I wanted to because money speaks to these people. Like they don't
Sure.
give a crap about these people. It's just I gave him $40 to just sit down and have nachos with her and he let me do it. And so I was sitting with this girl, and this girl was just terrified, just shaky little 14-year-old girl. And I was just fairly upfront with her. I was like, look, I'm just looking to learn. Um, like, I'm not gonna do anything to you. I was very upfront, like I'm not gonna have sex with you, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna take you to the back room or whatever. And when I told her that, you thought I would just had just given her like $1,000. Like she was so relieved. She was so happy. She was like, "Oh, thank
Oh, poor
goodness."
kid. Oh,
Oh God, it was just awful. I was like, "Well, how did you end up here?" And she was like, "Well, I lived in a poor village. I wasn't going to school. We weren't eating super great, and my family was praying because we're Catholic
yeah.
for a miracle. And this person shows up and offers me a job in this nightclub as a waitress. And we just thought it was a miracle. We thought God had sent us a miracle, and so I went with her, and I get here and she takes my documents, she locks the door and she says, "Okay, well, you're actually not going to work as a waitress. You're actually going to have sex with people. And if you don't, we're going to go back to your house and we're going to kill your family. And then we're going to take your 8-year-old sister who's still living at the house and
Oh,
she's going to take your place."
oh,
And so obviously that's enough motivation for anybody to comply with what they're saying.
yeah.
And the reason she was so terrified of me is that she had been in this club for 3 days and her first client, who was some European guy, comes in and he asked her for anal sex. And she was so Catholic, she had no idea what that meant. She was
Right.
so innocent. She was like, "I have no concept of what you're saying right now." And so the traffickers, the guy stormed out pissed because he didn't get what he wanted. And so the traffickers beat her up and then locked her in a room and made her watch Pornhub for 2 days of what anal sex porn looks like.
Oh,
And then they sold to her for the first time again that night. And so she would know what to do. And someone asked for that. And she thought I was going to be that person. That's why she was so terrified.
oh my Lord.
And I went back to my hotel that night and I didn't sleep at all because
Yeah.
I'd read the statistics, right? Like I'd read like
Yeah.
40 million people, 10 million children that being enslaved, and that 2 million of them are enslaved in sex trafficking. And I just met one of the 2 million. And her story, I was like, I can't believe that actually is her reality. So I went back the next day. I went back the next day I wanted to see her again to see if she was okay. And they had already moved her. They had already moved her to a different club. And I had to talk to somebody else. And I just knew just from that moment that I was like, I don't know what I can do. I have no money. I have no education. I don't have no nothing. I know I have the desire and I know I have somewhat of a knowledge base. It's growing. I want to start something that can help girls like this girl that I met that first night.
God bless it. So, wow. You know, I know just doing my research, there's a big Colombian connection. What is that with everything we're talking about?
Yeah, that's how I met Steve. Like I was just,
Yeah,
I've I was looking for some inspiration on like just fighting evil in Colombia, and who better to ask than Steve Murphy who did it.
absolutely.
I'm just like so I texted no, I didn't text this. So I traveled the world just learning about the different kinds of trafficking around the world. I met those girls, those two sisters in Dominican Republic. I went to Guatemala. I met someone that was trafficked by MS-13. I went out to Ukraine. I've been to Venezuela. I've been to all these different places to learn about just the different places that people are trafficked. And Colombia, I got a phone call from a guy from Homeland Security that asked if I could help these girls that he had just rescued in Colombia. They were trafficked by an American citizen. And so I met these two girls. They referred me to three other girls who were trafficked by the same guy. This guy was abusing them in horrific ways. He was selling the videos on Pornhub. And the dynamic of it, where this specific guy, his name was Victor Galarza, and he was a total loser. He lived in his mama's basement. He made no money, but he bought like fake Rolexes and fake Nikes. And when he strolled up in Medellin, Colombia, he could act like a big shot. He could act
Wow.
like a big time pimp or trafficker or whatever.
Yeah.
And these vulnerable kids fell for his ploy, and he in turn trafficked them, abused them, and sold the abuse on Pornhub. And that was one of like 40 cases that I found in Colombia, where I found American men, and like these men are nasty. Like these men are like in their mid 40s, late 50s, like overweight, just total losers, like pedophiles, like all these
Yeah.
different things that were finding the most vulnerable oh sorry, just clicked out of our screen. Find the most vulnerable in Colombia and using it to using their influence, using their money, using their power, using their whatever to find these kids and abuse them. Like I've met kids that have special needs that were trafficked by a
Ugh.
former Marine from the
Ugh.
Iraq War. I met a school teacher. Like there's this guy, this horrific human being. His name's Michael Roberts. He's in jail too. Um, he what he did is he was a school teacher, middle school teacher in Austin, Texas, in an all-girls school. And he
Oh,
had like this weird dynamic of he had an attraction to middle-aged girls and he had a hatred for middle school girls. And so he would travel down to Columbia to inflict this abuse on these little girls that
oh,
he was attracted to and also that he hated. And he was brutal to them. He was brutal, brutal, brutal. He was violent, 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 and just and so the Americans that I met down there, the American men that were abusing these vulnerable girls, like I just couldn't shake it. I'd never seen such like a disgusting power dynamic.
yeah,
And I love my country. Like I think the United States produces some of the best art, some of the best food, some of the best people in
right.
the whole world. And the fact that this city, this country was receiving the absolute worst that the States has to offer, I just couldn't sit with it. And I knew I wanted to. If there's a place in this world that I wanted to stand, it was between these American dirtbags and the vulnerable children living in Medellin, Colombia.
Wow. So here's a big question. How can this be stopped? And how did it get so out of control? It just seems like, I don't know, like the floodgates opened somehow or something and it just exploded.
Man, I think there's two ways it has to be three ways I think it has to be stopped, and each one of these is like a big pipe dream, honestly. But I think it's
Yeah,
possible, maybe not in our lifetime, but I hope that at some point like someone takes like the mantle that you and I have been working on forever and takes it and runs with it, and eventually ends this thing. I think one is prevention. I think like traffickers thrive on people's vulnerability and people's lack of knowledge. If you can give people the knowledge of like what these techniques look like and somehow make them less poor, that's why I think like politics is so important of like how do you make sure there's less poor people, because it's usually the poor, the people that are poor that are that fall prey to traffickers. We get some cases where like wealthy girls fall into this, but it's like one in every 30,000. Mainly it's people that come from low economic circumstances. Two, I think we got to support the victims. We have to make sure they have the resources to heal from what's happened to them because a lot of them come with a ton of trauma before they were trafficked. Some of them have addictions. Maybe they dropped out of school because they couldn't keep up with the schoolwork and being trafficked at the same time. So supporting the victims, supporting the survivors in their healing, and then I think you've got to go after the demand. Like you have to, like there was a case here close to where I live out in Salt Lake City where this guy was gang raping women. He was filming the abuse, and he was selling it online. And then he also, when his house got raided, he had videos of kids being abused by animals. It's a complete
oh,
monster.
gosh.
And for whatever reason, a judge here decided that 120 days in prison was sufficient enough for him. Like the message that that sends to other people that want to participate in this is
Right.
it's like it's just don't do it. Versus like we really have to like hit these people right in the face and hard where like there's a guy in Colombia, for example, this guy named Thomas Reno. He's a total loser. He's 79 years old, I think, and he was abusing these young kids in Colombia. And he just got sentenced to, I think, 35 years in prison in Colombia. That's the kind of stuff that like is brings me hope to where it's 35 years, he'll die in jail. His case will be publicized all over the internet. Like you have to make the risk of committing this crime too risky. And that's what I really think is going to end this. Like put the demand just where we can handle it. Because you'll never end the demand completely. There's just a lot of sick people out in the world. But if you can make it to where the people that are kind of on the fringe are too afraid to participate in this because the risk is too great, I think we'll eventually start to win the fight once that happens.
Yeah, it makes me want to get all Liam Neeson. You know, those Taken movies.
Hmm.
That's the first thing that popped in my head. Is like, it just you want to be Liam Neeson. You want to go after these poor girls that are being trafficked. And
Yeah.
as far as the punishment should fit the crime. You know, I've seen this over and over, and I don't want to get too political, but what I would see is like, oh my God, we need, gun control, gun control, gun control, and we need common sense gun laws. You know how many gun laws there are? And if you shot somebody in the city of Milwaukee, you might get a year or two, maybe, if they don't die. Now, if there was a
Yeah.
mandatory 20-year prison sentence, if you're just toting around a gun and you don't have a license to have said gun, guess what would happen? gun offenses would just they would tank.
Yeah.
Like a very clear way of putting this is I was in Belfast, Northern Ireland back in 2019. I'm going to visit a buddy that was there. And I'm like, hey, let's go out for a pint, Liam. He says, yeah, that sounds good. I'll pick you up. And we're out there, and he says, yeah, I'll just have a half. And I'm like, what? I knew him from the United States. I said, you used to drink more than this. And he says, you don't understand. He said, if I get stopped for drunk driving, they'll take my car. And I need my car for work. There's no effing around. We're
Oh
done.
my gosh.
You are done. There's a lot of European nations that are super. So guess what? How many people are driving drunk over there? Not that many.
Huh,
Because, if,
interesting.
if you take away their livelihood, you take, and it's like, okay, now you're very serious about this crime. It's the same thing with what we've just been talking about for the last hour. Is like, if you're
Yeah.
serious about this, okay, mandatory 50-year, imprisonment. Like you said, people are going to think twice or thrice before they engage in this behavior. And
Yep.
it wouldn't stop it, but boy, it would really curtail it.
Yeah, you have to make just like you're so you've hit on so many different things. Like the 120 days in jail, like that's not near enough. Like the school teacher I was telling you about, like the school teacher that was abusing these kids in very violent ways while being a teacher in an all-girls school in Austin, Texas. They only gave him 7 years. I'm just like, is that really
He'll
like,
he'll be out in 3.5.
yep, yeah, I can
And
already I get yeah, I get
yeah,
notifications from the DOJ email site that's like, oh, his date got moved up. And I'm like, why is it getting moved up? Like,
absolutely it did. Yeah,
oh God.
that's not surprising. And there should be an enhancer for somebody who is in a place of trust. Teachers, cops, clergy.
Hmm.
If they're abusing their positions like that, I'm the first one to say it's like throw the book at them because
Yeah.
people just naturally, trust you and,
Yep.
rightfully so. But if you betray that trust, no, all bets are
Yeah.
off. All bets are off. But talking about police, what's the cooperation like with law enforcement in here in the USA and other countries? What does it look like?
Oh, it's tricky. It's tricky because sometimes countries like don't like to play really nice with each other. Um, so it's interesting to get people on the same page and make sure we're sharing the same intel because a lot of the intel from the bad guys comes through us because we're the ones supporting the girls, and then we communicate that to different law enforcement agencies. Um, In other countries, like it's in other countries, not the United States, it's hit or miss. Sometimes you get really good agents, sometimes you get really bad agents, sometimes you encounter corruption, where people get tipped off or
Mm,
someone's got a judge paid off, and so that's just a bummer when that happens. And like they like countries like Colombia or Mexico or whatever, like they have to solve like their own problems when it comes to that. Like there's not, I don't think it's something that we can solve. Like it's a corruption thing that they have to root out. They have to find out who's paying who's connected and who's got the penthouse when they're a judge when they probably shouldn't have a penthouse.
sure, sure.
Um, the benefit of working like I think with the there's pros and cons I think like so a lot of the places the people we work with on the American side are the Homeland Security investigations and they're really good. Like they'll never take a case, I think, unless it's like let's say the intel's good. They don't chase false leads very often.
Yeah,
For the most part, what we've had is agents who are really respectful to our girls, really kind, really respectful, listen to what they have to say, and do a good job on the investigation, like keep us informed. The only, downside is it's a federal investigation, so sometimes it takes a long time to get something done.
yeah. There's nothing quick that way.
But
Yes.
no, but when they do it, it's usually they do a pretty good job. On like the foreign side, they do a little quicker sometimes. Like sometimes we've reported a predator to Colombian police, for example. I use Colombia for example. They'll interview the victims. They'll do their due diligence, and then 3 months later the guy's in handcuffs. However, the tricky part is when they're in the justice system in Colombia. That's where it gets tricky because the traffickers, the Americans, for example, can know who reported them and that's when you start to see things like threats. You start to see things like lawyers or someone like
Mm,
offering bribes to the victims or
okay.
random people showing up at their house, and so there's less protected. Like we always like to do it to where the Americans are the ones handling the investigation because the girls and the boys in some cases are just more protected from acts of violence that could happen during a judicial process. But it's tricky. And then on the Clement side, like they have budget shortfalls all the time. So sometimes like we have to cover things like meals or things like that. Like we have this thing coming up this Saturday, which is actually a really good project that we have going on where members of the Colombian military, like for in Colombia right now, there's a civil war going on between the government and this left-wing group called the ELN. And the soldiers for this left-wing guerrilla group are trafficking young girls. And so the Colombian army asked us for training on how to recognize someone who's being trafficked,
Hmm.
how to teach, how to recognize them, and how to treat them with dignity. And so we're doing a training next Saturday with members of the Colombian Army about signs of human trafficking and what to do when they encounter a victim, like what things to say, what to give them, how to treat them, how to not treat them. And so that's something that we try to do too, is just invest like in their personnel so that the next time they encounter a victim, the victims encounter someone who's safe, who's understanding, and who
Okay,
can bring justice on their behalf.
gotcha. So does the FBI get involved in, you were talking about Homeland Security. Does the FBI get involved in these?
Yeah, they do sometimes. My go-to is always Homeland because I just know more people there. But
Okay, sure.
yeah, we're getting more FBI contacts as well. But I will always give the first call to someone that I've already worked with before.
Oh, absolutely. So
Yeah.
what's needed to build a case against those who are trafficking? How difficult is that?
We there has to be a live victim. There has to be a victim that's collaborating with the case, that shares what happened to her, that can confirm, the places she was abused, what actually happened, where the guys live, what happened like during the assault, what happened during the trafficking. And we see more and more now to where because like you talk about like these traffickers, these abusers, like they are like they're pedophiles, but a lot of them are also businessmen where it's like, okay, I just raped this 14-year-old girl. How do I monetize this? How do I make a profit off of this? I had to pay $50 to rape her. How do I get that money back? And so what they do is that they sell it. They sell the abuse videos, they connect with other pedophiles, they sell it online, or they use like a referral system to where if there's a traveler coming into Colombia who's looking for a good time, and there's someone that lives there that speaks English, like they'll connect and be like, "Hey, do you know of a 14-year-old kid that maybe would be interested
Sure.
in being raped by me?"
Of
And these guys
course.
are like, "I do, but you have to give me $25 for a referral." And so a lot of that stuff, like the evidence is just on their phones, like on their phones, on
Hmm.
their devices, like they have there's a trace that's easy to track for our law enforcement partners, and our part is just making sure that the survivor is safe enough and comfortable enough to share that information, because a survivor who's taken care of, who knows when she's going to eat, that
Yeah.
knows that she can go to school, that has like her basic needs met, usually will be a better cooperative victim for law enforcement.
Yeah. Well, so, speaking of victims, what can we do to help them? Especially children, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people are listening to this podcast for one, like Libertas International supports 120 survivors across the world. And so the best way to help us is to go to libertasinternational.org and make a donation. Steve is really good about he's a big supporter of ours. I think he's a monthly donor where he gives monthly 25, $30. That's my favorite kind of donors because it's just something that we can rely on every month. We know it's
Yeah.
coming in, and we know that if a girl reaches out and needs help, that we can say yes to helping them. So if you want to support a survivor like Libertas International, that's the way to do it. Just go to our website, make a donation. It goes a long way. For those of you, like I'm pretending you have an audience, it's out there in Milwaukee or out there in Wisconsin or just around the nation.
Around the
The
world,
best
actually.
place,
Yeah.
oh, perfect.
Yep.
Um, the best place to help a victim, exactly where you are, is go to your women's shelter. Find out who's there, what they need. That's a great way to gain access to women and children who are both escaping their traffickers. Find out which nonprofits like work in your area. I mean, there's anti-trafficking nonprofits across the United States that support victims like in these local cities, in these local towns, and all of them need support, all of them need donations, all of them need mentors, all of them need access to different things like medical care or mentorship or whatever. And so wherever you're at, I would ask ChatGPT, give me five non anti-trafficking nonprofits or foundations
Okay.
that live in Boise, Idaho. Press enter, and you'll get some results. And if you want to serve some survivors in your own community, that's a great way to do it.
And, it's so sad that it's come down to that, too. That it's so easy to find all these organizations that are helping these victims. That means there's a whole lot of victims going on. So that's really
Yeah.
sad. So, your podcast, tell us about it.
Yeah, so I have two podcasts. One is for those of you looking to learn more about human trafficking, go to the Libertas International podcast. I have some of my favorite experts I've ever met on the in this field across the world are interviewed on that podcast. It's a great way to just learn more about like what human trafficking looks like around the world and how to help. And then my other podcast is called the Locked Off Logic podcast, and that is for me and my best friend to talk about movies, TV shows, inspiring stories. You should be on there, Patrick. You should come on my podcast, my
I would
Locked Off
love
Logic
to.
podcast. Okay,
Absolutely.
good. I'm gonna set a date with you when this when we end this. But it's it's just it's a way for me to kind of get out of my own head and talk about things that inspire me because one thing that I always look for inspiration where I can find it, just keep going. And a lot of the times that comes through media. And so I like one of my favorite movies is Logan, the X-Men movie Logan. And that movie always brings a lot of inspiration because you find this superhero, like this guy who's a man among boys and he's tired, he's traumatized, he's done with this. Like
Yep.
he just doesn't want to do this anymore, and he encounters someone in a situation that's so horrific that he can't say no, despite him being able to say no. Like he's not the one being chased. He's not the one being hunted. If he doesn't intervene, there's zero personal consequences for him personally, except for right here, except for in his heart and his conscience. And I think that's a struggle for all of us, me included, to where if you see a situation that maybe doesn't affect you personally, are you able to look at yourself in the mirror at night and say, I could have done something,
Yeah.
but I did nothing? And like, so me, like when I watch that movie, I'm like, oh my gosh, like there's principles I can do, like apply that in my own life and all these different things. And so me and my buddy, he's a cinematographer. We talk about
Mm.
movies and TV and story and all these different things that inspire us and people that inspire us so that people like me that go to media and that go to people to find inspiration on how I can be just a better human being every single day. We talk about it on the Locked Off Logic podcast.
Oh, nice. Is there links to that in your Libertas website, or is that separate?
No,
Okay,
it's
that'd be
separate. But
separate.
if you want to
Okay.
find it, they can find it on YouTube, Apple, Spotify,
Yeah, just
and then TikTok. Yeah, I'll send it to you.
yeah, just send me the link and I'll put it in the show notes. And
Cool.
obviously, your Libertas International, absolutely that link will be there as well. But yeah, I'd love to be on your show. I think that'd be fun.
Nice.
Yeah.
Talk about
So
Patrick.
let's talk about danger. The dangers of what you were doing to you and maybe your loved ones. How do you mitigate it that? Because, you're blocking people making money and, making money in very nefarious ways, obviously. But when money gets involved in things, that's when, stuff can go very sideways very quickly. Do you have any stories of like close calls to your own personal safety or anything like that?
Yeah, I think one time I was in Mexico. We were doing an operation in Mexico, and in Mexico, it's just a different beast down there. And we had this trafficking ring that we were following, and that we wanted to help the victims that were being exploited by this lady. And the operation was supposed to happen at midday, and we got notice at 9 a.m. in the morning, and we were on the island of Cozumel, Mexico, like out
Yeah,
there in
Costco. Yeah.
Cancun. Yeah, that the traffickers knew who we were. They knew that something was going down, and that we should get back to the airport ASAP because the operation's off. Someone leaked some information, and we had to get back ASAP. And so, we had this rental car that we just left on the beach. We just left on the beach. We were like, okay, well, sorry, Hurt. Like, I hope you find your Jeep like here on the beach. And this was like in the time of like COVID too, where like to get back into the States, you have to have like a negative COVID
Oh, yeah,
test.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, dude. And so we ran to the boat. We were switching our flights to get back that same day, flying from Cancun to Salt Lake City. And we were like, while one person was changing their flights, one person was taking a COVID test and trying to see if it would, it was like the PCR or whatever one was like the
Yeah.
quickest, but the less accurate. And just trying to do it before the boat came in, the last boat of the day.
Whew.
Boat came in, we had our negative test, we get in, but the only flight out of Cancun that day was like at 5 p.m. or something. And we hopped on the boat at like 2:30.
Oh
So
boy.
we're already cutting it close.
Yeah.
We we make land at like 3:30. Flights are changed, but the flight leaves at 5:30, and for anyone that's ever been to Cancun, like the customs line for that thing is just miserable.
Sure.
And so we're driving like the taxi driver, we paid him double if he'll just break the law and speed there.
Yeah.
Um, and all of us are kind of doing the same thing. We're all trying to get to the airport to make this last flight. And we did. We made it. We got to the airport. We got lucky. Had a really good gate agent that obviously saw that we were stressed out. We are gonna miss our flight, so he helped us get through the line quicker. And I'd tell you, I've never felt so safe as the second I sat my ass down in, seat 12E on that
Yeah.
Delta flight, just being like, oh, like I'm glad that we are no longer in that experience. And so that was good. Like that was when I was actually on the ground. I'm glad we got out safe. But even now, like there's been some threats against, my life, some of the girls' life for us speaking out against this because we are affecting people's income, we're affecting people's evil desires.
Yes.
And it's been an interesting time of like for me personally, it's really hard because I have a lot of people that I love very deeply in Colombia, and I don't know I'm gonna see them again. And like they ask questions like these survivors, they ask questions like when I'm coming back, like when I can do all these different things, and I tell them I can't go back yet. And it's been tough, and I'm still managing that just within my own emotions, kind of
Yeah.
rectify that with the God that I believe in of like how like this sucks. Like how can I not be able
Right.
to hug these people that I care so much about? And if I could I think a lot about this, I talk about like finding motivation like in media. And there's a video game I really like called The Last of Us 2. The TV show comes out on HBO Max, and everybody should check it out because I'm sure it will be awesome. And the main character in that show, Joel, he has to make a decision that has some consequences for a lot of different people. He has to stand up to evil, and it has consequences. And he's confronted about those decisions that he makes. And he was like, I tell you, if I could, and he's humble, he's been thinking a lot about this. And somebody asked him of like if you could do it again, would you do it again, despite what you know now, despite the consequences,
Yeah.
despite all these things you're going through? And he gives an answer. He's like, if I had the chance to go relive that moment, I would do it all over again. And the way he says it just like gave me just like a little like
A little
pump
push.
in the chest or something.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
like, yes. I was like, yeah, like it sucks like having your life threatened. It sucks like being separated from the people you care about. It sucks like having to do all these things. But like I did that because I chose to stand between evil men and innocent children. And if I had a chance to do it all over again, I would do one thing different. I'd probably use a fake name, like when I spoke publicly or anything like
Okay.
that, just some generic name. But everything else, I would not change a thing. I would do it all over again.
Can you tell us about any of the death threats that you've had?
Yeah, so there's some gangs that are connected to some drug trafficking, money laundering, and human trafficking. And so in the support that we give to these girls, we started to affect their money.
Yeah.
And because we affected their money, like they got pissed and they threatened some of the girls, they threatened some of our team, they threatened me personally to where like, hey, like this was nice and cute when you guys were arresting and supporting the arrest of like these small time like these mothers or these teachers' aides or
Yeah.
whatever that were trafficking these kids, but now you've got involved in organized crime, and it's a just different game altogether. And for me, like I'm still managing that. Like I've been threatened before, like in court and stuff like that, but it was losers that were already in handcuffs. So it's like, well, what are you gonna do, bro? What are you gonna
Right.
do?
Right.
But now, organized crime, gang violence, like it's something that I'm still getting used to. And so I have people like Murph that mentor me through that. I have this really awesome network of people that are part of like the San Diego gang conference that they put on down there
Oh yeah.
every
Yep.
year.
That's biggie.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And so they've been
Yeah.
mentoring me just how to keep myself safe, how to keep my team safe, and how to deal with this. And it's not something I ever wanted to learn, but it's something that I'm learning about with organized crime and gang violence
Yeah.
and like again, like I wouldn't do anything any different because I stood up for people that needed help and
Right. Now,
were the
can
consequences? Yeah, I'm trying.
do you feel comfortable saying like which gangs or what part of organized crime or not?
No, I probably can't tell you that. I can't.
Okay,
I,
that's
I
fine.
wish I could, but we're still in a fight
I
with
totally
one of
get
the
it.
main players in that. So yeah.
All right, yeah, no worries.
But have me back on, I'll tell you, like
All
in
right,
six
sounds good.
months.
So speaking of danger, how do you keep yourself detached from the ugliness and all the horrible circumstances that you were so close to or you are so close to, how do you keep sane? Because, you see stuff that you can never unsee.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Oh man, it's a good question. I have like my outlets where I love to binge watch TV. Like I love to just get out of my own head for a bit, just Netflix and chill and just let my mind just go into a different story.
Sure.
That's something that's really helpful to me. I work out a lot, I hike a lot. I love to like go on road trips and listen to podcasts. Like the Cops and Riders podcast. Like
Thank you.
that's gonna be my next one for the road trip. That's always really good for me. Spending time with the ones I care about, being really present with them. The Locked Off Logic podcast, like you get a lot of my therapy through that because I talk through things that are going on with the work that I do
Hmm.
and using like media as a way to express what I'm feeling. I meditate a lot. And then, I try to maintain a close relationship with God. Like I'd be lying to you if I said it was always perfect because it's not.
Right.
But every once in a while, God is just really good at showing me just how much how uh how he loves these people more than I ever could. And sometimes I forget that. I sometimes I question his absence or his indifference. But God, he's good at letting me know every once in a while. Like I'll share a story. Um, so there's a family that their traffickers tried to kill him in Colombia, and so they traveled to Mexico to ask for asylum at the border. And they called me when they were at the border, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, what the heck? Like, I didn't know you guys were there. I want to come see you. Like, I'm gonna make
Yeah.
sure you guys are okay." And so I flew from Jackson Hole to Salt Lake to San Diego, crossed the border by foot, and just made sure this family had what they needed to be refugees for a little while while their asylum claim was processed.
Yeah.
And we just bought all these different things. The family was very grateful, and this the survivor's been with me for a number of years, and she has two kids, and her oldest daughter was 12 years old. And as I'm saying goodbye, like she starts to cry, like, just really, start to cry. And I was like,
Yeah.
it's okay. Like I'll be back soon. It's just a quick 2 hour flight from Salt Lake. I can be back really quick. And she was like, it's not that. It had something else. And I was like, oh no, what's going on?
Okay.
And so she pulled me aside and she's like, I feel really bad, like asking you this, because you just bought her all this. I just bought her all this food and all these different things to survive while they're asylum, like waiting
Yeah.
for their asylum claim. And she was like, we walked here from Mexico City to Tijuana, and Mexico
Holy,
City to Tijuana flight wise is like 3 hours.
holy
And so it's like
cow.
it's like a week long walk. And she was
Yeah.
like, and my first period came halfway through.
Ah.
Yeah. So she's like, I've been walking in the same underwear with my period for 4 days.
Ah.
And she was like, and she's saying this like all just through tears, right? She's just like,
Yeah. Poor kid.
and she's like, can you please buy me some underwear and some tampons? And I was like, at first off, I think that is the bravest thing anyone's ever said to me. Like the amount of vulnerability and bravery it took to tell me that, even
Yeah.
though I've known her for a long time, was just so brave. So I told her no. I was like, look, you're gonna take my card, you're gonna take your mom, and you can go buy the
Yeah.
underwear, you can go buy the stuff. You don't need me to go do that with you. That's something very intimate. You go do your thing, you go get washed up, and I'll see you in an hour. I'm gonna order some nachos and stay here. So that's what happened. She took her mom and she
Yeah.
went and bought the stuff and came back and they finally got, asylum, right? Um, they came into the States, a couple months ago after waiting at the border for 8 months. And obviously, like when you get here, it's a new experience, but it's also like, okay, how am I going to pay for my life here?
Yeah.
And and so me, I was like, well, I just want to do something to distract him. Let's go into the mountains and see some snow or something. And so like, okay, we hopped in my car, we drove up to the mountains to go see some snow and the girls played in snow. They got to take their pictures, and we stopped by this lake, and we were the only ones at this lake. And there was this group of like Harley riders that were
Yeah.
around the lake as well. And the survivor's husband was really impressed with their motorcycles. And he's like, yeah, they're cool. He's like, do you think they let me take a picture with their motorcycles? And I was like, I don't know, maybe, but like people in the States might be a little weird about that. So we decided not to
Yeah.
take a picture with the motorcycles and just to keep observing the lake. But there was like four dudes, four middle-aged guys in their Harleys, and they were trying to take a selfie, but they just couldn't get it right.
Yeah.
And so they're looking over at us, and like the look that you're looking at someone and
Yeah.
you're like, you kind of
Exactly.
want to ask them to take their picture. And I was like, oh, they want to take their picture. So we hustled over there, and the Harley guy was like, It's like, I feel bad asking this, but we want to take a picture with our Harleys next to the lake. Would you guys take a picture of us? And I was like, yes, with one caveat. My friend here, it's his first day in the United States, and he really loves your Harleys. Can he take a picture with them? And he was like, oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, he can get on them if he wants. He can go for a ride. And so I'm interpreting all this for like this family that doesn't speak any English. I'm like, do you guys want to go for a ride on these? And they were like, is that an option? It's like, yeah, like I don't know these people, but it's an option. And so we they take their pictures, they go ride on the Harley around the lake and around the mountains, and we all meet up after to say goodbye. And the Harley rider was asking me, he's like, so what's your story? And I was like, well, it's her first day here in the States. We're looking to get like a, just a new life, running from danger in South America to come here. And the Harley driver happens to own a dental clinic. And he was like, well, they're
Oh,
looking for work. And I was like, yeah, they are actually. Like, what do you got in
yeah,
mind? He's like, well, I'm looking for a cleaner to come clean our office 3 times a week. Like, it's not much, but to start, like, would they be okay to do that? And obviously, I said yes, like, because the guy was going to pay him like $200 a day to come clean their
yeah,
office. And, just like that, they have employment, and I give God the credit to that because, all we were doing is just going up to the mountains for a drive. And there were only two groups of people on the mountain that day. It was me and this Colombian family and this group of dentists who just went out to ride their Harley that day. And somehow we overcame like the American stigma of like not socializing, and
right.
we socialized. And now she has a job. And for me, it's just every time I forget that God is there, that God is present, He's really good at giving me a subtle reminder of, don't you forget that I put you in the spot and that I love these people more than you do.
Wow. So let's talk about the red flags, that people should be looking for when it comes to human trafficking. When should we contact law enforcement? You see, like, for a while there was these like really corny TikTok staged like videos.
Yeah.
It's like they give like a hand signal or something or whatever. You know, when what are the red flags and when should we contact the cops?
Yeah. First thing I would say is always follow that feeling in your gut. If you feel like something is off, I would definitely call the cops. From the cops that I've talked to, they would prefer to get 9 false calls and then get the right one versus like having not missed the one that actually needed help. And so follow that gut.
Okay.
Call that gut feeling. Two, like there's different things that people can recognize. Like some of the traffickers will brand their victims. So if you see like a 15, 14-year-old girl that has like a dollar sign on her body or like a barcode, like someone's name that's not her dad or her
So
mom or
a
something, like
literal
that's,
brand.
yeah. Yeah, some
Okay.
people actually brand them. Either brand them with their name or brand them with like a with like a barcode or something because they're just sickos. Um, for strangers, like if 15, 14-year-old kids are carrying a lot of cash on hand, I would say more than like $100, that's a red flag. It's just a
Okay.
cashless society, but cash is still king in a lot of these places where exploitation happens.
Mm,
And so if there's a kid that has too much cash on her or him, that's usually a red flag that something weird's going on. And for your own kids, like monitor their Venmo account. Because I mean, there was a case out in St. George, Utah, where mom called the cops because she found something like 50 or 60 grand in
oh,
her daughter's Venmo account. And
holy
it's because
cow.
her boyfriend, who was like 29 years old, was trafficking her via
Uh,
webcam. And the kid just forgot to empty her Venmo one day in like this fake bank account. And so those are a few of the things. And then, look for the physical markings, the bruises, the bumps, the
yeah.
cuts. It's not unusual for a kid to be tired, like throughout the day. But if a kid is excessively tired, it's probably at
Mm,
least worth intervening. Because a lot of the kids that I've worked with here in the States, they're not, they're trafficked after school. Like they go to school like a normal kid, 8 to 3 or
yeah.
whatever it is. And then they're trafficked from 5 till 3 in the morning.
Uh,
Um, and so if a student just seems out of it, groggy, addicted, or just lacking a lot of sleep, it's probably a
yeah.
sign that there's something more happening.
Wow. Damn. All right. I think we touched on this, but I guess we could talk about it a little bit more. It feels hopeless. What are the trends? And is this crisis getting worse or better?
It's definitely getting worse. I think, unfortunately, like the numbers j jumped up quite a bit over the last couple of years. Like for the number that we used to use a lot, like in the anti-human trafficking community, was like 40 million people that were enslaved. And the newest estimates came out after like a decade-long study, and someone says it's closer to like 60 million now.
My God.
So somehow, with all this money, with all these resources, all these activists, somehow we went up 20 million, which, just sucks. And for every successful prosecution, there's probably three or four that get away, unfortunately. There's still a lot of poor people that take fake job opportunities. There's still a lot of different things that happen to the vulnerable community to where it is getting worse, and it's unfortunate to think about. So I try to focus on like the one, right? Like the one that's now free because of some kind of intervention, because some kind of support. And so I have this amazing little girl. She fled Venezuela when the situation was getting really rough. She got to the border of Colombia and Venezuela, and she was 11 years old, and a pimp found her and would during peak traffic hours, he would make this 11-year-old girl go into vehicles and give oral sex during peak hours of traffic. Um, just she was one of the 2 million, she was one of the 40 million, she was one of the 60 million, but we were able to rescue her out. We are able to support her, see her grow, see her thrive, and now she's the best little 17-year-old kid. She just got her first tattoo, like these butterflies on her
Yeah.
arm. She has like movie nights with her boyfriend. She gets in like little petty fights at school over like stupid stuff, like the
Yeah.
clothes or talking to a certain boy or something like that. And I told this kid, I was like, look, this is what it's like to be normal, like, right? This is beautiful. Like, you're this petty little bullshit that you have in high school,
Yeah. Right.
like, it's petty and it's stupid, but it's also beautiful because that's what you should be doing as a 17-year-old kid. You shouldn't be, being forced to give oral sex at stoplights. You should be just going to movies. You should be getting a
Just
tattoo. You should be
yeah, do
disobeying your
normal kid
parents. Just,
stuff. Yep.
just doing normal kid stuff. And so, like, yeah, like, can we save them all? No, like we can't save them all. We can try. We can invest. We can invest in policy and prevention and rescue and intervention and rehabilitation. And for me, what gives me hope is that, I wasn't able to save all of them, but I saved this one. And instead of giving oral sex at stoplights, now she's fine with her boyfriend. And for me, that is a win. That is such a win. It's such a something to be celebrated. It's something that's just beautiful. And so when I think of, the numbers of it, it can feel overwhelming. And so I just have to focus on the one right in front of me towards like, if I can make your life, if I can make you free and make you heal and give you a normal life, then it's worth it.
Okay. Now I know we talked about it. We touched on it briefly. You are religious. I would say you're a man of faith. Do you think this has brought you closer or further away from God? The work that you've been doing.
God, I don't know. It kind of depends on the day.
Yeah, it's a
If you,
toughie. I mean, yeah,
yeah,
it's a
it
tough
is.
question.
I've asked God a lot of tough questions. Like I do have questions for God. Like when the time comes where my clock is up and I meet God, hopefully I do have some questions of just why he allows things that he does, why sometimes like you can feel like his indifference, or why people pray for liberation but never get it. Um, like I do have those questions, but at the same time, like I come to appreciate like the gospel of Jesus Christ. I come to appreciate just the story of the creation, where you talk about like just the birth of women in general. Like God created the whole world, the oceans, the skies, the earth. He created man, and then when he created females, women, that's when he was like, I finally got it right. This is the peak of my creative abilities. I can't do anything better than this. I'm going to take a break and take a rest. Like it was the last thing he created, which I would assume meant that it was the closest thing to perfection that he had. And trafficking takes that concept and just spits on it to where like these women, these girls are commodities, they're sexual objects, they're things to make me money. It just perverts the whole concept of what God created women to be. And I feel like it's a way, even though like I may not always feel close to God, I feel like it's a way that I can serve him, to where if through me, somehow, some way, a survivor of trafficking gets to know a safe male that wants the best for her, that wants to see her thrive, to see her grow, to see her get connected to the community, and I'm able to show God's love through me, through my actions to these people, then I'm happy to be on his errand. I'm thankful that this is the errand that he's put me on, because I know that there's a lot of I don't know what like the girls that are in Libertas's foundation, I don't know where they would be without us. Just speaking,
Sure.
just with little to no humility, I don't know where they'd be without us. And I know that I don't meet them by chance. I know that those meetings or connections, like they were somehow divinely orchestrated, and I'm happy that they were because they've changed my life. They've given me meaning. They've given me hope. They've and to see a girl go from giving oral sex at traffic stoplights to see her as a normal high school girl, I know that that interaction did not come without the divine grace of God, and so for that I'm thankful.
Yeah, see, people who are have been placed in extreme circumstances, what I have seen from this podcast and my own personal experiences, just seeing the ugly, it could go either way. I've seen people totally turn against any kind of religion or deity because it's like, how could God let this happen? It's
Yeah.
like, this is so horrible. And then I've been in circumstances where it's like, okay, you just got shot 9 times and you're walking out of the ER in 2 hours. How does that happen? So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't have an answer. I don't. And I've seen people turn like super Bible thumpy to now I'm an atheist. I've seen both extremes, and yeah, I'm always curious to see what somebody's got to say about it because I've seen all, just
Yeah.
wow. All right,
I
well,
tell you, like, what one quick comment is funny because someone told me this once. A Christian man told me this once. It's really stuck with me of just the gospel and salvation and redemption, all these different things, which I really love and appreciate. But I tell you, sometimes the hope that there's a hell gives me more hope than if there's a heaven. I'm like, that is so true, man. Like at some point, these people get punished. Like thank God for heaven, but man, also thank God for hell because the concept of hell brings me a lot of peace.
yeah, that's funny. I like, I never thought of it that way. That's
Yeah.
very interesting, and that you, yeah, you put a smile on my face for today.
Oh, good.
Because
Oh,
I've
good.
seen evil, and you've seen evil, and you're just like, there's got to be some ultimate form of punishment for you because it's just you're stealing oxygen to begin with.
Yep.
You're an oxygen thief, and yeah, hopefully there's something somewhere that will, yeah, absolutely. But hey, we got some Facebook questions. Let me
Cool.
those. Let's see. Nick Russell, no questions, but comes at a great time because of human trafficking will be a part of the book that he's planning to write. So that's good. And and he said, it blew him away that it's this big of a problem. A lot of people don't know this. And Nick is a very worldly guy. He's done a lot of stuff, and boy, it's something else. Then Miriam Hasham asks, I'm actually researching this topic for the moment. It's horrifying. Is there any report research looking at strategic trafficking of special or of specific groups and terrorism, either to finance it or part of an ideological struggle? I'm thinking here of like ISIS in Iraq and the targeting of Yazidi people and the strategic objective, Boko Haram and the targeting of Christian women and girls for abduction. And she just kind of goes on with that.
Yeah, yeah. The second question, I think there's a lot of good studies done in the on the continent of Africa because there's so many vulnerable women in Africa that people like Hamas, people like Boko Haram are really finding a lot of their victims in Africa and trafficking them to the Middle East to essentially be sex slaves for some of these terrorist armies out in these places. And these people, like I'll give you an example of like a case that I'm currently working on now and raising money for is
Yeah,
I got a phone call maybe like a month ago from a girl that I know pretty well. This girl was an interpreter for the American Army way back when it was like they're right in the middle of the war. This girl was 17 years old, and this a soldier made a promise to this girl's dad that he would do all he could to get his two daughters out of Afghanistan because these people knew that at some point the Taliban was coming back.
sure.
And so he did. These two girls got out of Afghanistan. They ended up in Mexico. That's where I met them, was in Mexico. We stayed in touch. We did all these different things. And she called me the other day and she told me that her sister had been gang raped by the Taliban that had left her in a state of paralysis. Um, just a violent gang rape that left her without the ability to walk. And they're looking to get medical care for her in another country because in Afghanistan, Obviously, like there's very little medical care, and it's
Yeah.
all supervised by the Taliban anyway. And so, in the process of raising money to get this girl out of Afghanistan, the Taliban found out about it and attacked their family.
Oh,
And so, this medical mission that we were on to get this rape survivor, and I bring up trafficking in this as I forgot to mention this in the beginning, but the Taliban gang rape was orchestrated by the girl's uncle, who's also a member of the Taliban.
oh,
The Taliban sold information on where this 15-year-old girl would be, where when she would be there, and that's how she was raped by these men. That's where the trafficking aspect comes in because there was an exchange of money.
mm,
And so the village elders, the Taliban find out that this girl's trying to get medical care outside of Afghanistan, and so they attack the family in Kabul. And so our mission now with me and this girl that I know is to remove this family out of Afghanistan, to get them to India or get them to Iran, where she can get medical care and they can be free of the Taliban's immediate threat inside the city of Kabul where they were located. And I mentioned that case for one. It's a case I'm currently working on. I'm still raising money on. If people want to support that, go to libertasinternational.org, make a donation to support this evacuation of this family, this trafficking survivor. And then two, it was orchestrated by her uncle and other members of the Taliban on a very small scale to where members of armed groups, members of terrorist groups that are working all throughout these places in the world that are recruiting vulnerable women to go to the Middle East, to go serve in these armies or wherever that's happening. And then also on a much smaller scale, Taliban sympathizers and Taliban members are talking amongst themselves on how to exploit and abuse vulnerable girls. And in this case, the uncle sold the info. I don't know how much he sold the info for, but was like, she's going to be at this house at this night alone. This is when you show up. 7 members of the Taliban showed up, and now we're trying to figure out how to get her to walk again.
oh boy. All right. I think we should wrap this up. We've been talking for a while, and I appreciate your time.
No, my
Any
pleasure,
final
man.
thoughts?
No, I just want to say thanks, Patrick, for having me on the podcast. I'm honored to be on this podcast. I hope people go visit our website and support the girls that are in our foundation, support this girl from Afghanistan. And then if you decide not to support Libertas, like support somebody in your own community, support somebody close, because I guarantee you, like the more doors you start to knock, the closer it will hit home, and someone that you'll never expect will be a survivor of abuse, of exploitation, of sextortion, of trafficking, and maybe they just don't have the words yet to know what happened to them, but they're there and they're closer than we want to admit.
All right. So, if people do want to help you out, where do they find you?
So you can go to libertasinternational.org. That's our website to go make a donation. Our social media is we're on all social media. We're on X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. It's just Libertas International or Libertas Freedom. If people want to send us a Venmo, we have Venmo. That's a little easier for people to donate. It's Libertas Freedom. That's our Venmo at Libertas Freedom. And then for me, you can find me at LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, and I have a photography page on TikTok if you want to go see where I'm hiking. And then if you want to listen to me and my best friend talk about movies, we're on the Locked Off Logic podcast.
All right. Cool beans. Oh, one more thing. Aren't you writing a book? This is Cops and Writers.
Yeah, I'm looking for a publisher now. I finished my book last year, right after I got done speaking at the United Nations and before the threats started to happen. I finished a nice little period in there.
Yeah.
It's called Wyoming Winds to Latin Lights. It details my journey. It details the story of people that inspire me, some cases that are really close to my heart. And I'm looking for a publisher. I don't know how to find a publisher, so I'm still kind of like in the exploratory phase of finding a publisher. And if not, I may just put it out on the internet and charge $25 and send people a PDF.
All right. Very good. And when we're on, I'm gonna, end this now, but during the debrief at the end, I know I can help you a little bit with that too.
Oh, very
So,
cool. Thanks, man.
all right. Very good. Well, thank you so much for everything that you're doing and what you're going to do in your organization. And yeah, you're doing God's work, aren't you?
I'm trying best I can.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it, Patrick.